A very warm welcome to our two-day performative conference, Unexpected Lessons, Decolonizing Memory and Knowledge Today. Welcome to our dear speakers, artists, to the digital audience, to the very, very limited, due to COVID restrictions, audience here at the Akademie der Künste in Berlin. Welcome to our dear friends and colleagues. I'm happy that our speakers from Senegal and Ghana were able to arrive in the end. A special welcome to Nana Ofodiata Ayim, Felvin Sar, and Malik Ndiaye. It's been quite some work, and we are happy to finally be here standing in front of you, opening our unexpected lessons, which we hope will be unexpected indeed. My name is Mahret Ifeoma Kupka, and together with Isabel Raabe, curator and project developer based in Berlin, and our colleagues in Nairobi, Jim, Chuchu, Njoki and Ngumi from the Nest Collective, Chao, Tayiana, Maina, Rosie, Olang, and Kahira and Ngige, I curated Unexpected Lessons. When I'm not organizing conferences like this, I'm curator at the Museum Angewandte Kunst in Frankfurt, Germany. A quick side note for the audience outside the Akademie der Künste: the live stream will be in English mostly. For German translation, please switch channels in the player. Unexpected Lessons is the kick-off or prequel to the Talking Objects Lab, a planned think tank and exhibition series in Germany, Kenya, and Senegal that Isabel and I are currently working on. Unexpected Lessons fans out the themes we want to explore further in the coming years, together with artists and scholars, especially from the African continent and the diaspora. For decades, debates have been going on about the colonial past of the major European nations and their handling of provenance, restitution, and the return of looted objects from colonial contexts. These debates have reached another climax last year, fueled by the worldwide Black Lives Matter movements. The reach and complexity of the debates came to the force, and with it, racist continuities, systematic ever since, still socially effective until today, not only affecting everyday lives, but also politics and cultural practice, in the global north as well as in the global south and in relations with each other. The worldwide demands to deconstruct or restitute symbols of colonial power, be they in the form of monuments or street names in urban spaces or as looted objects in museum collections, in favor of inclusive societies that allow for diverse coexistence and equality hardly differ. Black Lives Matter becomes a burning glass in which the networking potential of individual actors and activists worldwide becomes visible. The Talking Objects Lab aims to bundle current debates against the backdrop of decades of research in order to find a fundamental new way of looking at objects, their care and attributing of meaning. In European museums, it is primarily the items that tell their colonial history in terms of violent accounts, theft, and being snatched from complex contexts. The original contexts and significance involved are barely represented in the museum, while in some instances it is not even possible to find them there because they were not known, were never known, or are frequently even lost, not to mention erased. Furthermore, there is the issue of whether the contextual meanings could ever have been portrayed in a museum, whether their processual quality would even have contradicted the idea of turning objects into museum exhibits. What prospects do we have nowadays to rediscover such contextual meaning? Colonial history has become a part of the objects, yet it is not the entire history. We wish to contribute in order that the histories become more complete. One way to do so is through artistic interventions and process-oriented approaches. After all, we only have a colonized set of instruments available to us. We are all colonial subjects and cannot simply step out of that context and do something different. We are in the process of discovering what being decolonized will and can look like. an exchange and organic interlinking of different movements with a continuous consideration of the speaker's own position is crucial. We depend on the diverse narratives that exist among ourselves, for each other, about one another, so as to be able to create a more comprehensive understanding of the world and of coexistence. New perspectives and different questions are needed in order to break up colonial thought patterns and challenge Eurocentric white views that are deeply rooted in the European understanding of culture and knowledge, and that continue to shape Europe's interaction with non-European cultures today. In new historiography is needed different knowledge productions. Our task, and we are starting it with Unexpected Lessons these 2 days, is to track down traces of lost knowledge in order to be able to shape a different future. In his Afrotopia, Felvin Sarr sees Africa as a laboratory for new forms of coexistence that are not based solely on material values, but are also characterized by hitherto repressed spirituality and plural forms of knowledge. We want to focus on these plural forms of knowledge, the re-evaluation of epistemologies and objects about power and healing, as well as chances of artistic perspectives and the radical questioning of Eurocentric museum forms of preservation and presentation. We want to create space for the development of entirely new forms of coexistence. For me personally, in this very sensitive, warm, welcoming and respectful environment gave me a glimpse of a good way of coexistence. We might be heading in the right direction, though there still is a long way to go and many unexpected lessons ahead. It is not so easy to formulate clearly right now what precisely talking objects will look like in the future. We are creating something that has never existed before in a way that hopefully makes a break with traditional practices and mechanisms. In this regard, the old saying, "the journey is the destination," is particularly apt here. I'm really curious about what we will bring into being. It should in turn be adaptable for others who will then develop it further. Talking objects is more a process than a form. Thank you.
Dear speakers, dear artists, dear digital audience, dear audience, friends, colleagues here at Akademie der Künste, warm welcome also from my side. I'm Isabel Raabe. I'm one of the curators of this program. In my work, I'm developing art projects that disrupt Western perspectives or the Western way of looking at the world and bring decolonial perspectives into focus. And that is what Unexpected Lessons, Decolonizing Memory and Knowledge is aiming for as well. I grew up in a culture that was shaped by enlightenment, a westernized society in which knowledge is based on objectivity and science, coupled with a well-established canon of art and culture. Everything outside this canon was marked as the other according to Edward Said's theory of othering. Europe's colonial past and the current structures that have arisen from colonialism shape not only realities of life, politics, cultural practices, but also the canon of knowledge. The Portuguese sociologist Boaventura de Sousa Santos calls the systematic erasure of knowledge that does not match the European knowledge system epistemicide. Our project seeks to find out what knowledge can be found beyond these European knowledge systems. So, what can knowledge be today? In our search for this, we focus on 5 thematic fields. First, decolonizing memory. What history do we remember? How can collective memory be decolonized? Are collections, museums, archives, libraries still useful as guardians of our memory? We look at the body as an archive, the colonized body, the longing for healing. This is something the artist Nathalie Angweso-Mumba Bikoro is doing in her work. She will be performing tonight for us. We are also taking the urban space into consideration. The team in Nairobi decided to focus on the city, the public spaces in which people live and move along the streets with colonial names. Under the title Decolonization Labor is Emotional Labor, they are capturing sentiments and memories of the streets. In cooperation with Decoloniale, Memory Culture in the City, we produced a video city walk along colonial traces from here at Brandenburger Tor, just behind me, to Wilhelmstraße, where the Berlin Africa Conference took place in 1884-1889. The second field, decolonizing knowledge. What has been and is the default way of producing knowledge, and how had it been predicated on the discrediting of competing forms? We are aiming for polyperspectivity. How can other knowledge systems, non-academic knowledge, sensoric knowledge, spirituality, juxtapose Western academic knowledge? Felvin Saar, who's speaking to us later, is claiming an epistemic shift and asks for acknowledgement of the plurality and variety of knowledge and thought. We are critically mapping academia. Mahret is discussing this topic tomorrow on her panel, Black European Studies. And we are looking for de-Westernization of philosophy. Yala Kisugiti will talk to us about this tomorrow. The third field is the re-evaluation of objects from so-called colonial context, the term speaking from Western perspectives. We demand a radical change of perspectives on ethnographic objects in European collections. The Senegalese writer Biragou Ismail Diop once said, "Écoutez plus souvent les choses que les êtres," which means listen more to objects than to people. We are listening. And what can objects tell us? How can we make the polyphonic narrative resound? And what does the absence of the objects or subjects mean for the local societies? And how has the time the objects spent in European museums changed their meaning? I quote Nana of Riata Ayim, "Objects have multiple identities. Objects are things in transition." I'm sure that also the final panel, Repenser l'histoire d'art, with Bénédicte Savoy and Malik Ndiaye, will discuss this tomorrow and will talk about the gaps in Western art history. The fourth field of interest is the empowerment and chances of artistic perspectives. Art is an important tool of knowledge and an important tool of resistance. As curators, we make no distinction between academic or artistic knowledge production. They are of equal value. We invite artists who explore artistic strategies of decolonization. The sound artist Elsa Mbala, who is with us today, told us once how she discovered sound as a medium through which she understands the world. Sound enables her to let memory through the ears into the body where it can be kept as embodied memory. The Nairobi-based artist Siovia Kiambi will intervene in colonial spaces with her character Kaspale, and Laya Aukongo will perform her poetic knowledge tomorrow. And the fifth field is questioning classical forms of preservation and presentation in museums. Are museum classifications still acceptable? Must we break with the European idea of the museum, which is defined by preservation, presentation, and possession? And what about the coloniality and education in museums? Carmen Mörsch and Nora Landkammer will give an input to this topic tomorrow. As mentioned by Mahret in the beginning, Unexpected Lessons is the starting point for the Talking Objects project. It consists of the think tank and exhibition series Talking Objects Lab, which is a laboratory in which we would like to further investigate all these questions I just mentioned. And the lab finally leads to the Talking Objects Archive, which is supposed to be a digital archive for decolonial knowledge production, which will be hosted and curated on the African continent. The idea is using a digital collection of selected objects, and a narrative of multiple perspectives will be opened up. The archive is supposed to go online in 2024, so we invite you all to follow the project Talking Objects and to participate in it in the coming years. So now there's still many people to thank, and I'm doing this on behalf of Mahret and me. First of all, our inspiring, heartwarming fellow curators, Jim, Chuchu, Njoki, Ngumi, Chao, Tayiana, Maina, and their team, Rosie, Olang, and Kahira and Ngige in Nairobi. We are very, very much looking forward to continue the work with you. I would also like to thank Nena Onoa for the film program she curated for this event. A personal thank to Mahret. Now I'm speaking for myself. It feels like that we searched each other, we found each other, we had so many inspiring and fruitful and long conversations in the run-up for this program, and I think it's a start for something good, and I'm looking forward to it. So I want to thank the supporters, of course, the Capital Cultural Fund, Hauptstadtkulturfonds, the Federal Foreign Office, the Federal Agency for Civic Education, Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, die Kulturstiftung der Länder, Projektfonds Kultur.Gemeinschaften. Thanks also to our cooperation partner, the Akademie der Künste, for hosting us here at Brandenburger Tor, especially to Johannes Odenthal, Denise Baumeister, Ellen Scheier, Maike Afner, and Roland Pohl. Thanks for your support, and a thank you to all technicians here making this possible. I also want to thank the translators, Astrid Gese and her colleagues, Gida Toureau, Kate Vanovich, and Helen Ferguson. And a thanks to our cooperation partner Decoloniale, Erinnerungskultur in der Stadt, Memory Culture in the City, who developed and produced the video city walk along colonial traces. Originally, it was planned as a city walk analog with people in real time. Now, due to the pandemic, it's a digital video walk available online on talkingobjectslab.org and decoloniale.de. Thanks also to Media Bricks Berlin, who produced the video walk and video interviews for our blog. We thank our graphic designers from Visual Intelligence, who developed this amazing visual language and the Talking Objects alphabet. And a big thank you, of course, to our team. Selina Basra for her amazing project coordination. Matthias Wolfing, who is our really perfect production manager. A thanks to always chiming Denhard von Haling, who is in his very unique way responsible for the press relation. And to Karina Herring, who is very competently doing the financial controlling. Thank you, dear artists, speakers, hosts, for your contributions, not only to the program, but also on the run-up, the many helpful criticism, the supportive inspirations you gave us. And yeah, it's really heartwarming to finally, after all those months and years in isolation and distancing, to have at least this small group of people here. And I wish us all 2 very inspiring days, and welcome Nana Oforiata Ayim. So the day starts with a mistake. We still have to wait for Nana. We switch over to Nairobi to our fellow colleagues there for their welcome remarks.
Hi everyone, warm greetings from Nairobi. My name is Jim Chuchu from the Nest Collective, and I am here with
Chao, Tayiana, Maina from African Digital Heritage.
So I suppose we should provide some kind of introduction to what we're doing and who we are. The Nest Collective is a group of very nice Kenyans who have been working together since 2012.
I support
that. We work with film, with music, with fashion, with literature, and in this particular project we are thinking through the urgent questions of restitution and object movement, which is a topic we've been dealing with since maybe 2017, when we got involved with a project called the International Inventories Program, which worked to create a database of Kenyan cultural objects held abroad. And I think that's the context in which we met Chao and the African Digital Heritage. We're excited to be here. We're excited to be representing Nairobi, Kenya, because in many ways, East Africa and Kenya in particular have been absent in many ways from the conversation about object movement, because that conversation tends to be focused heavily on West Africa. So yeah, we're happy to be representing Kenya and East Africa. Chao?
Thanks, Jim. My name is Chao. Again, I run African Digital Heritage, and just to give you a little bit of a background on what we do, the intersection of our focus and the interventions that we have look at culture and technology, essentially, and where these two things meet, particularly African heritage, African culture, and digital platforms, digital access, digital infrastructure. And the reason why we chose these two areas of intervention was because we were looking at technology as being a thing that's really shaping and redefining African perspectives of heritage in our past, but also in the things that we are capable of doing, you know, in terms of questioning and challenging and radically reimagining, visualizing cities and, you know, villages and objects. I think the power that lies within having access to deconstruct what has formerly been canonized and what we knew as fact is really interesting for us. And within the restitution discussion, we are partners in a project called Open Restitution Africa, which is an initiative between our organization and Andani Africa, based in South Africa, looking at the ways in which we can create an open data platform where materials on restitution, particularly from an African perspective, are available in a transparent, accessible, centralized way. But we also realize very much in the same way that you're saying East African perspectives are not as recognized or have not been at the forefront, that when it comes to like a global scale, despite the fact that we're talking about African objects and African, you know, cultural artifacts and human remains and archives, African perspectives are not at the forefront. You know, we do not understand the experience. There's so many nuances and complexities to the restitution discussion that just go completely ignored within this space. And so our role here, and particularly working with the Nest, it's exciting to deconstruct a lot of these elements, what it means in the physical space, what it means in the digital realm, and how these two spaces kind of feed into each other in one way or another.
It's interesting that both organizations kind of are working with data with regard to this question, and that speaks about how technology was always hailed as this thing that would change society. But it's interesting to me how technology is becoming very useful in unpacking history, reshaping history, and that in order to do that you have to think about technology and data as being not neutral. And there's this kind of global north fetishization of data as being neutral, as being
democratic,
yes, as being accessible. And I guess you probably have thoughts about like the morality and the emotion and the weight of data.
And even when you speak about the weight of data, and particularly even when we look at digitized collections and the way in which we are presented with data in singular, you know, silos, you know, this is an object and this is what the object, you know, there's no interaction between the intangible, the complexities, the knowledge systems around certain things. And I think when we start to question what technology means for us as Africans, we also have to question what have we experienced in the physical world that we're experiencing today, even in the digital spaces. You know, there's no neutrality, there's no democracy. If anything, we know that the same biases and inequalities that we see and we experience every day have very well manifested themselves on Facebook and Instagram and things that we were taught to think were for us, but really are just reinforcing the same systems. And we have to be so intentional about understanding that we have to tackle these things, that it doesn't disappear with, you know, the fact that they're digital. And I think the question for you would be, like, based on your experience with the IIP program, how has what you learned from working on that project influenced, you know, the discussion today and what you bring to the symposium in a way?
I think the Nest got into the IIP project, we kind of like rolled into it, and we didn't really know that it would become this multi-year, multi-country experience. But it really helped to codify our knowledge. And I think there's such an interesting thing that happens as a black person, as an African, when you start to codify your knowledge, because then you find that it hasn't been done before in many ways. And actually that leads me to this idea of decolonization as emotional labor, which is a thing that we are presenting together in this event. This idea that the labor of unpacking the weight of data comes with a lot of emotional baggage that isn't really accounted for in the global north, because for them, object movement is not it's not an emotive topic. It's a question of logistics, a question of righting historical wrongs, and they approach it with a very kind of logical,
scientific kind of rigor.
Like and for us, this is not about that. It's about loss. It's about absence. So what has that project? The project has been useful to force the collective to name our feelings, to say this is what we believe, and we count this as knowledge.
And the question of knowledge is also interesting, because when we look at objects and the value that we have for objects, but also the kind of Western way of looking at heritage, in which objects are like sort of like made into these gods, and the people who created these objects are irrelevant. And this separation between people and objects, it's so fascinating for us to discuss this, because as you're saying, from one perspective, it's a scientific project. It's diplomatic, it's scientific, it's this analytical thing. And for us, there's so much that we still need to map and unpack. And one of the things that we talk about within this symposium is the other objects, and the issue, the concept that objects could be anything, artifacts could be anything. It could be landscape, it could be names, it could be intangible, and
anything that human beings put value on.
Exactly.
And then because the value systems between the global north and south are very different, then the objects become very different. And so while there's this kind of overemphasis on the sculptures and the masks, for us we are also interested in the archives, the colonial archives as objects. We are interested in public spaces as archives, as objects. And I think this kind of pushback from the continent, that's saying that your provenance science and your entire framework for this discussion needs to be widened, because we have other values that you guys don't have. And
other values that we ascribe to these objects, because even when we speak about them coming back, they have taken on new meaning. Even their migration in itself has become a part of...
They are expatriates.
Yes, expatriates. They're coming back home, and what does that mean for us to be able to unpack this discussion? And I think through the discussions that we have through the symposium, we unpack quite a lot of these things. So it's exciting, and you'll probably see, as the audience, you'll probably see more of what we're talking about in the sessions to come.
So the three themes that the Nairobi team, as we call ourselves, thinking through are decolonization being emotional labor, which is us kind of looking at all the unnamed feelings that we go through when we unpack these things. The other thing that we are thinking about is what we just call the new behaviors, which is imagining a future in which restitution has happened in some shape or form, and what role do the museums of the future and institutions of the future play? How do they engage with objects in the future? And the last one is the other objects, which we just talked about, this kind of expanding the idea of what an object is, so that then its return can also be deeply considered alongside.
And I think the conversations are beautiful in the sense they span across, past, present, future. And we are unpacking these three things and these multiple worlds and multiple timelines today, and what it means, what it meant yesterday, what it means tomorrow. And it's good to have that kind of space, because there's nothing that's set in stone, And for us to come to this discussion when we had been told that African objects are primitive, we have no history, we are also learning and unlearning so much through this process. And I think we need to be more, as we're doing through this project, to say that we are learning, and it is a process. There's emotional labor, as you've said. So that's, I think, the themes are trying to bring out these complexities in a very personal way. Yeah.
So over the next few days, we'll be joined by our colleagues from the Nest and other friends and family who are joining us. And yeah, we're excited to be on this journey with you guys, and we hope you enjoy.
Thank you. Hope you enjoy and see you in future discussions.